Back from the Fantasy Football Profits. As always, we thank you guys so much for supporting our channel. We love the community that we're building. As always, before we start, we say congratulations. If your fantasy team is still in it, you're probably in the championship right now, and good for you. That's always so much fun. Unfortunately, I'm not in a championship in any leagues this year. Todd Gurley got me good in 2 leagues. You are, however, in 2 of your leagues, so hopefully that goes well for you.
Yeah,
Hopefully
I'm excited.
your spirit gets crushed as mine did.
Nice.
Speaking of spirits getting crushed, let's talk about the night we've had. So we're going to have to apologize if we do a little misspeaking. It's been a long day. We started the process of designing the background and everything and prepping and doing research. I started about 6 o'clock and you were busy with meetings, but you jumped in about 9 o'clock and we worked that till about midnight, 12:30. And then we recorded the video. It took about an hour, got done, and the second we tried to back out and save it, it just disappeared. So it's about 1:32 in the morning, and we're gonna re-record, and hopefully it doesn't go too badly.
Yeah. So
But anyways, we'll just get right into it. As always, this is the best information we have. We spend hours do the best numbers and give you the best possible advice. That's all we try to do here, and we don't try to be too fancy or cute with anything, so to speak. I believe you have the first game.
first game, the Ravens versus the Colts. Now, before I get into any numbers, names, we always say that you got to take this information, put in the context of your league. And what I mean by that is I don't know your scoring system, bench depth, who's out there available, etc. So we may say to sit a guy, but maybe for your league and what you have, it means you need to start him and you need to lower your expectations or whatever. So take this in the context of the league. Also, if you have specific questions, we would love to answer them. Put at the bottom of the video, and we'll get back to you in a timely manner, not only with who you think you should who you should start or sit, but try to give you a little bit of a reason behind why we believe that. And so let's look at the first players here for the Ravens Colts. Look at quarterback Joe Flacco. Now he plays the Colts, who allow the 7th most points to quarterbacks. Now he's really kind of turned a corner after a terrible start. Early in the year, Joe Flacco was brutal. He's playing better. In fact, the last 3 games, he's averaging 270 passing yards per game. During that same stretch, he's got 5 touchdown passes to only 1 interception. He's worth a plug and play. If you're somebody out there, or maybe it was depending on Aaron Rodgers, who now went back on the IR, he's a guy that you could plug in and play and trust him. Jacoby Brissett in this game. Now, he plays the Ravens, who allow the fewest points to quarterbacks. Now, if you take away a 3-game stretch where Jacoby Brissett played well, other than that stretch, he's really played very bad this year. If you look at the other 11 games, you take that 3 out, look at the other 11 games. During that same stretch, he only had 5 touchdown passes, 7 interceptions. That's less than a touchdown pass per game. That's pretty brutal there. Quite a bit less. So I would say at this point, I wouldn't even begin to risk starting Jacoby Brissett against a Ravens defense that is legitimately very, very good. In fact, if you take a look at it, 8 times this year, the Ravens defense has held a quarterback to single-digit fantasy points. In fact, on average, those 8 games that they held him to single-digit fantasy points was actually 4.68 points. They've been very, very tough against. You need to sit him. As far as running backs go, let's look at Alec Collins. Now, he plays the Colts, who give the 15th most points to running backs, Alec Collins there. Last week, he took a little bit of a step back there. But even the best backs have off games at times. He's still the lead back there, no doubt. He's going to be getting a majority of the carries, 15 to 20 carries. He still had a wonderful 4.9 yards per carry and has 5 TDs in the last 6 games. He's also had 5 receptions, so they're starting to use him in the passing game, which keeps him more involved. He is a solid running back to play this weekend. Let's take a look at the other 2 running backs there, Woodhead and Allen. Now, Allen last week had 70 yards, so some people are wondering, is he back on the radar and somebody that we should consider? I would still say he's nothing better than a role play. Now, the reason why he was able to get so many carries, they were so far ahead in that game that they sat Collins, arrested him, and they went to Allen. So he's a guy that's still very limited. Woodhead goes, some people would think maybe Woodhead has some flex value in PPR leagues, but I would say, honestly, don't even consider him at this point. Now, Frank Gore in this game. Now, he plays the Ravens, a lot of 10th most points to running backs. So you look at Frank Gore. He's 34 years old. He's certainly past his prime, but he is a volume play as a running back 3 this weekend. That's where I'd begin to consider him. He's got a safe floor, but a low ceiling. Now, the wideouts go in this game. Look at T.Y. Hilton. Now, T.Y. Hilton plays the Ravens, allow the 4th fewest points to wide receivers. You have to go back to week 9 that T.Y. Hilton had a very productive game. Look at the last 5 weeks, only averaging 30 receiving yards per game. So he sits as a wide receiver 4, maybe a wide receiver 3 in deeper leagues. Obviously, he's got a lot of talent, but until Andrew Luck comes back, you can't trust him. Now, I would sit Macklin in this game. He's doubtful, and he has struggled. And Mike Wallace. Now, Mike Wallace plays Indianapolis, allowed 9th most points to wide receivers. 5 of the last 6 games, he's been fairly productive. In fact, 5 of the last 6 games, he scored double-digit points in PPR leagues. So I would start him as a wide receiver 3. Now, as far as tight ends go, last game we said Benjamin Watson is a guy that you need to start. I hope that you followed that advice. If you did, he had a good game. Now he plays Indianapolis, allow the 15th most points to tight ends. I would say the guy that you could start. He's a fair play, but not a great play. He's a guy that you would expect maybe 4 catches, 65 yards, and maybe a token TD. As far as Jack Doyle goes, I would start Jack Doyle. He is the favorite target for Jacoby Brissett, and they play the Ravens. Will give up the 11th most points to tight end, so go ahead and start him. As far as kickers go, you need to start Tucker, and you need to sit Adam Vinatieri. As far as defenses go, you need to start the Ravens defense. They are very good, and I would sit Indianapolis' defense.
Now we get to talk about the Vikings and Packers game, and as you heard at the very beginning, we talked about Aaron Rodgers is placed on the IR, and in case you don't know, that means there's no way he's going to play Saturday against the Vikings. It's not going to happen. So now we get to talk about Brett Hundley's going to be in the game. Do not start Brett Hundley. He's facing the Vikings, who have the 3rd ranked pass defense, only allowing 199 yards a game. Not only that, but the last time that Hundley played in a away game, he only got 84 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 1 interception. That's going to be a very ugly matchup, a very easy one for that Vikings defense. On the other side, we look at Case Keenum. He's facing Green Bay's defense, who gives up the 6th most points, or fantasy points, to quarterbacks. Not only that, but Keenum has played great. In the last 6 games, he's had 13 touchdowns. In every one of the last 6 games, he's gotten over 200 yards every game. So Case Keenum, definitely worth the start. I mean, it depends. If you have Tom Brady, you got to go with Tom Brady, right? It depends. We talk about situation and context and what your league is like, but I like Case Keenum in most leagues. Move on to running backs. Latavius Murray, averaging almost 14 carries a game, having 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games. Now he's going against a Green Bay defense that gives up the 6th most fantasy points to running backs. I like to think that's a match made in heaven. I think it's going to be a great week for Murray. On the other hand, a lot of people liking Jerick McKinnon lately. I don't like Jerick McKinnon that much. He's more involved in the passing game, and even then he's not involved with much volume, especially in the running game. If possible, I would avoid starting him. As you mentioned, as we talked earlier, in a PPR league, maybe a little bit more might be an RB3 if you're really bad in RB2 or a flex spot, but he's a guy I would try to keep out of the lineup. On the flip side, we go to Green Bay's running backs, Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones. Don't start either of them. Not only are they playing Minnesota, which gives up the fewest fantasy points to running backs all year, but last week against Carolina, they only combined for 77 yards together. With Aaron Rodgers out, that defense is going to focus in on that run game. It's going to be very ugly for them. Move on to wide receivers. Green Bay gives up the 6th most points to wide receivers. All in all, that Green Bay defense is just bad, and it's going to be a very easy week for that Vikings offense. Thielen, in the last 3 games, he's got 1 touchdown and over 100 yards in every game. So definitely start Thielen. Diggs, not so much. You got to look, if you're really needing some depth, if you're looking for a flex spot or a 3rd wide receiver possibly. But, look at some other options. I don't think he's necessarily a great start. Another guy to talk about is Jordy Nelson. With Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelson has 6 touchdowns in 5 games with Rodgers. Without, which he's going to be this week, he has 0 touchdowns and less than 60 yards in every game. Combine that with the fact that they're facing Minnesota, who give up the 11 fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. As you talked earlier, as you brought up to me earlier today, cornerback Xavier Rhodes held Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, Odell Beckham, AJ Green all combined, so all 4 of them combined to just 94 yards when he's covering them. That's insane. Yeah, he's such a great shutdown corner. Another guy to talk about is Devontae Adams, who is actually questionable and unlikely to play. However, if he does play, and this is something you have to watch, if he plays, he's going to be great. Him and Hundley, they play very well together, and they really like each other, and Hundley loves to rely on Adams. We'll move on to tight ends. Don't start any Green Bay tight ends. They don't use them very often. That's just simple as it gets. On the other side, the Vikings have Kyle Rudolph, who has 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games. On top of that, Green Bay last week gave up 116 yards and a touchdown to Olsen, who is still just overcoming that foot injury. However, Kyle Rudolph is questionable, and Green Bay allows the 6th fewest points to tight ends this season. So, with how thin the tight end position is, you certainly have to start Kyle Rudolph, but that's everything to consider with him. Moving on, start Kaya Forbath, kicker for the Vikings. That's a great matchup for him. Don't start Crosby. I feel like they're not even going to get in position for him to kick field goals. Obviously, you'd be foolish not to start Minnesota's defense against Brett Hundley and the Green Bay Packers, who've been pretty bad lately. And of course, don't start Green Bay. Green Bay's defense not very great right now.
Let's go to the Browns versus the Bears. So let's start with quarterbacks Kaiser. He plays the Bears defense. The Bears defense is actually pretty solid. They give up the 7th fewest points to quarterbacks. You need to sit Kaiser. He's having a very bad year. 9 touchdown passes to 19 interceptions. A quarterback rating of 59.4. He's just not very good at this point, so don't even consider Kaiser. So we got Mitch Trubisky. Now, he plays the Browns that allow the 5th most points to quarterback, so it seemed to be a good matchup. Now, if you look at Mitch Trubisky, rookie quarterback, he's actually playing better lately. He seems to be figuring it out, and he's played more effectively. With that said, he still only has 7 touchdown passes in 10 games. He's still a rookie. It's very risky. He doesn't have a lot of good weapons there, so he's a guy that you need to sit. You can't trust your Super Bowl to Mitch Trubisky at this point. Now, as far as running backs go in this game, you got Jordan Howard. Now, Jordan Howard plays the Browns, who allow the 11th fewest points to running backs. He's a great running back. If you look at the first 2 years in the league, he's really been quite the find for them. He's, I think, taken in the 5th round. But he's hindered by a bad offense at this point. So here's what teams do when they play Mitch Trubisky. They really load the box, shut down the running game. For that reason, it makes him very hit or miss. He's had 5 games this year with over 100 rushing yards. But he's also had 6 games where he's at under 7 points in terms of fantasy goes. So he's been very hit or miss. You don't know what to expect. He's too good for some of you to sit at this point, but you can't trust him as a running back 1. So this week he falls into a running back 2 category. He's a little bit lower in PPR leagues. They don't use him a lot in the passing game. I would sit Cohen in this game. Now look at Isaiah Crowell in this one. Crowell plays the Bears, who allow the 10th fewest points to running backs, but Crowell has been running very well the last 7 or 8 games. In fact, last 7 games, his yards per carry have been 5.69. He's looking good. He's running physical. He's running tough. He's looking very good there. Now, I would say he's a running back 2 or 3, depending upon your league scoring and size. The one thing that hinders him is Kaiser at quarterback. The offense stalls out a lot. He's not allowed to goal line carries. So I would probably say that Crowell trends more closer to the running back 3 at this point, although he is playing pretty well last 7 games. Look at Duke Johnson in this game. Now, Duke Johnson's got 61 catches on the year and 537 passing yards or receiving yards. So he's a guy that we would say has flex value in PPR leagues. Duke Johnson, you could go ahead and start him in that. As far as the wideouts goes, look at Josh Gordon. He plays the Bears, allow the 14th most points to wideouts. Josh Gordon, for a guy that's been out for 2 years, didn't have the preseason, all that time to work on time and work the offense, I think he's looked very, very good. In fact, if the Browns get a new quarterback next year, and I assume that they would, whether it be free agency or through the draft, if the Browns get a new quarterback, I would say Josh Gordon, if he stays out of trouble, is going to be a top 10 wide receiver. He's that sort of talent. He's proven that he's still got the skills. Unfortunately, this year with Kaiser at quarterback, he's no higher than a wide receiver 2 this week, and that might be a stretch, probably closer to wide receiver 3. I would sit Corey Coleman, and I would sit Inman in this game. Now, the Browns allow the 15 fewest points to wide receivers. So you look at Kendall Wright. Kendall Wright's actually looked better the last 2 games for the Bears. Last 2 games have been targeted 24 times. He's had 17 catches for 188 yards. He would be kind of a high-risk sleeper. I see him more as a wide receiver 4. If you need to start somebody, you could roll the dice with him. I would sit all tight ends. And all kickers here in this game are really too risky. I would sit them also. I would sit the Browns defense, but I would actually consider starting the Bears defense. The Bears defense has been decent, and they have a good matchup against the Browns this week.
All right, now we get to talk about the Lions and the Bengals. So we'll start off with Matt Stafford. If you're in a position where you're very desperate for a quarterback, you could lean on Matthew Stafford. He's been all right. Now, we talked about that team isn't great, but he has such high volume, averaging 30 passing attempts per game this season. Now, he's going against a Bengals defense that gives it the 15th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. But in the last 7 games, Matthew Stafford has thrown 14 touchdowns, so he's played fairly consistent. He's played all right. He's a guy you can lean on if you need him. On the other hand, we look at Andy Dalton. He's a guy who's just simply played terrible against a slightly above average pass defense in Detroit. I just don't trust him, and I'm not going to put him in my lineup in the playoffs and the regular season pretty much at all. We'll move on to running backs. Another thing to just completely avoid are all Detroit running backs. It's just a mess in that backfield. That offensive line isn't doing them any favors. All the running backs in that backfield combined last week for 20 carries and 91 yards and 0 touchdowns. That's pretty bad when that's the best you can muster in all 3 of your backs. All right, and we look at Joe Mixon. Now, Joe Mixon is currently questionable, but if he plays, he's a good number 2 running back, a good flex play as well. He's played very well lately, and Detroit's given up the 3rd most points to running backs. If he does not play, the other guy is Giovanni Bernard, who will be replacing him. Giovanni Bernard has averaged 12 points a game in the last 3 games. So if Mixon doesn't play, Bernard's going to get some volume, and I think he's going to have a fairly solid game. Move on to wideouts. AJ Green. Now this is a very interesting situation. He's so hit or miss. He's so hot or cold. This is really depends on who you have. Now I think he's one of these very talented. He is AJ Green, and it's hard to keep him out of your lineup. But you just don't know with him. He bumps down. He's not a wide receiver 1. He's maybe a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3. If you have lots of other talent, like in one of my leagues, I happen to have lots of good wide receivers this year. I might actually go about starting him if you have enough talent. If you made this far, you have some talent, but that's quite a bit of talent to say that you're going to keep AJ Green out of your lineup. On the other side, we see Marvin Jones. I see him as a must start. Cincinnati does allow the 4th fewest points to wide receivers. However, I like Jones this week. He's had a successful season this year, and he is the main target in that offense. Matthew Stafford loves to lean on him on 3rd down and in the red zone, and he's got to throw somewhere no matter how good that defense is, and it's even pretty good. We look at Golden Tate. I don't trust Golden Tate. He's just an average wide receiver against a good defense. If you're in a PPR league, he does have more value, as we talked about earlier. You told me, I didn't even know he's on pace for 90 catches this season, or above that a little bit.
Yeah, 90 catches. That'd be the 4th consecutive year, and so he's got some good value in a PPR league. In standard leagues, he drops off considerably.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't even consider starting him in a standard league, but in a PPR, you could possibly look at it. Neither the Bengals or the Lions have any tight ends that I would consider. They've just played bad lately. Ebron got a touchdown 2 weeks ago, but that was just a fluke. He's played terribly. He's not getting any catches or yards. We look at kickers. Again, neither teams have kickers that I would really want to roll with. Both their kickers have had fairly poor seasons. Detroit is an okay field defense this week, as the Bengals offense is so bad. They give up to 9th most points to defenses, so especially in the last 2 games. But I definitely wouldn't start Cincinnati's defense, and that's all I have for that game.
So the Rams versus the Titans. Let's take a look at Jared Goff in this game. So what do we think about Jared Goff? Well, he plays the Titans, who allow the 16th most points to quarterbacks. Now, last week he had kind of a quiet game. He had 120 yards, 2 TD passes to 1 interception. Those numbers aren't great, but here's why he had lower numbers. They destroyed Seattle. That game was really done at halftime. In fact, early in the second quarter, early in the third quarter, they really put that game out of reach. You can see 2 o'clock in the morning, our second recording is catching up to us. So so Jared Goff actually had a much bigger game there. He was done early. They need to throw the ball out. They absolutely destroyed Seattle. Now he's got his favorite target, Robert Woods, back. I'd say that Goff is a solid play this week. Somebody that you can trust is a decent play. Let's look at Marcus Mariota. Now, last week we said he's going to rebound in a great matchup, and he did. He had 240 passing yards and 2 TDs. Now, he's really kind of been bad all year. And to make matters worse, he plays the Rams, who allow the 9th fewest points to quarterbacks. If you look at his previous 5 games, he's only had 4 TD passes to 8 interceptions. I would advise sitting Marcus Mariota this week. Let's look at the running backs in this game. Let's look at Todd Gurley. That's a no-brainer to start. As we said earlier, he had to face Todd Gurley in 2 games, got destroyed. If you had Todd Gurley starting for you, he'd probably help you get to the Super Bowl. And look at right now, he had 4 touchdowns last game. On the year, he's got 17 TDs. He's highly involved in the passing game. So even if they shut down the run, they use him a lot in the passing game. He's a guy that you must start. Todd Gurley is a no-start. Anything you want to say about that? On your spirits crushed?
Other than it hurts and it's not fair. The world's cheating me.
That's cheating. So anyways, you got to start Todd Gurley. Let's look at the running backs for the Titans. You look at Murray and Henry. Well, the Rams allow the 8th most points to running backs, so this would seem to be a good play, right, for those running backs. Now, the concern that I had, if you look at DeMarco Murray, last 9 games, only 1 time where his yards per carry above 3.3. He's really struggled to run the ball. Well, here's the thing, though. Even though he's struggled to run the ball all year, the Titans continue to use him. They give him the goal line carries and targets in the passing game. So with that said, even though he has struggled, he's got appeal as a running back 3 this week. You look at Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry's actually been the better running back this year. His yards per carry are considerably better. He's looked more powerful. For whatever reason, the Titans are reluctant to give him a lot of carries, and therefore I can't trust him. I would say you need to sit Derrick Henry until we just see more volume there.
Certainly.
As far as wideouts in this game goes, look at Robert Woods. Now they play Tennessee, allowed the 11th most points to wideouts. Now, he's Goff's favorite target. Last week he came back after being injured. He had 6 catches, 45 yards, and a TD, and that number would actually be bigger, but like I said, they didn't need to throw the ball at all in the second half. They destroyed the Seahawks. You look at the 3 games prior to his injury, he was averaging 100 yards per game receiving, and he had 4 touchdowns during that same stretch. So Robert Woods is a guy that you can start. Look at Sammy Watkins. Now that Woods is back, you need to sit Sammy Watkins. He doesn't have enough volume to trust. And then you can start Cooper Kupp. I like him. The rookie wide receivers look very good. He's a wide receiver 3. He's got a little more value in PPR leagues. Let's look at the wide receivers for the Titans. You've got Rashard Matthews. Plays the Rams, allow the 9th fewest points to wide receivers. Look at 3 of the last 5 games. Matthews has looked pretty well. He's got 3 TDs during that same stretch. He's not a great play. I would say he's a wide receiver 3, probably closer to a wide receiver 4, and I would sit all other wide receivers for the Titans. As far as tight ends go, I would sit the tight ends for the Rams, and I would start Delanie Walker. Delanie Walker's a guy that you need to start. He's had 3 TDs the last 4 games. Now he plays the Rams, allow the 14th most points to tight ends. And Delanie Walker leads the Titans in receptions, yardage, and targets at this point. He's their best weapon there. As far as kickers go, I would start Suckup and Greg Zuerlein. They're both good starts. Now, if you take a look at the Titans' defense in this one, the Titans have had 23 sacks the last 4 games. They're getting after the quarterback. Now, they do play the Rams, who allow the 2nd fewest points to defenses. So even though they're playing better, you probably want to sit the Titans this week, and I would start the Rams' defense.
All right, now we move on to the Chiefs and the Dolphins. We'll just get started with a guy I absolutely love right now as far as fantasy value goes, Alex Smith. First off, he plays the Dolphins, who give up the 15th most points to quarterbacks. But that's not what impresses me. Over the last 4 games, Alex Smith has averaged 20.5 points per game. They say if it ain't broken, don't fix it. You might as well ride this cash cow till he runs out of hot games. I'm telling you, I think he's going to continue on against this defense that's just par at best. On the other side, we see Cutler, not an option. Do not play him. We look in the last 5 games, he has an 8-9 touchdown interception ratio. He has thrown more interceptions than he's thrown touchdowns in 5 games. That's a long enough span to show he's consistently bad. It's not a fluke, not a good option. Move on to the running backs. A guy we cannot tell you to start enough is Kenyon Drake. He's a must start. In the last 6 full games that he's played, he's averaged 18.9 points per game. Now, there was 1 game mixed in there where he didn't play the whole game, and he only got about 4 points, but he didn't really have a full opportunity, so I cut that out and figured in the last 6 games he's completed, he's basically averaged 19 points a game. That's unbelievable. Other guy on the other side for the Chiefs is Kareem Hunt. Look in the last 2 games, he's played great. Plus, Miami allows the 5th most points to running backs. I mean, I just couldn't imagine a world where your roster's so good that it's wise for you to start him in this situation.
To sit him, yeah.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you were questioning me. I was all freaked out there, like I misspoke. Now we move on to wide receivers. We talk about Tyreek Hill. He's a guy to sit. Miami shuts down wide receivers, and Hill is very hot, cold. You just don't know what you're going to get with him. He's a very prototype, or you just use him in these kind of trick plays and on kick returns and sweeps or whatever. But as far as a straight fantasy receiver, he's not great, and it's a bad matchup. Now we look at Jarvis Landry. He's a guy that I think has played really hot, and if I had him, I'd certainly be putting him in my roster right now. In the last 11 games, he's had 8 touchdowns. That's really impressive, but he also has the matchup to back it up. KC gives up the 3rd most points to wide receivers, and you look at it that Jay Cutler is really relying on Landry to step it up lately. We look at Kenny Stills and Devontae Parker. Not very good options this week. Maybe Kenny Stills if you're absolutely desperate, but if you're in the championship, I'm going to assume you're not that desperate. And Devontae Parker, I wouldn't start him if I were the worst team in the league right now. He's playing horrible. We look at, of course, you guys are smart. If you're in this point of this league, Travis Kelce, if you have him, start him. He's got over 900 yards and 7 TDs this season, and it's a great matchup against Miami's pass defense that's brutal and gives up the 5th most points, fantasy points, to tight ends. Talk about kickers. Got to start Harrison Butker. He's having a great year. Great kicker right there. Sit Cody Parquet. Got to sit him. I think it's going to be a very bad week for him. And the Chiefs could be a good fill-in against that bad Miami offense that should turn the ball over and gives it the 5th most points to defenses. Just depending on your league, you might have some better options, but maybe not. If you need them, that's a team you could turn to.
Look at the Patriots versus the Bills. Let's start with the quarterbacks. Tom Brady. Now he plays the Bills, allowed 3rd fewest points to quarterbacks. Last time Tom Brady faced the Bills, he struggled a little bit. And so what should you do? Well, you need to start him because he's Tom Brady. I know that's difficult. I know a lot of you are struggling right now because he's not hitting on all cylinders per se. But unless you've got, I don't even know who you would start in his place, maybe Russell Wilson. Do you honestly have another quarterback out there that you can trust? I think it's a no-brainer. You have to start Tom Brady. You may want to do it with a little bit lower expectations. Then let's take a look at Tyrod Taylor. Now, the last time he played New England, his total, he had 65 passing yards and he had 1 interception. So he really struggled. Now, I know a lot of you are tempted to go with him. He's a game. He could have a big game. Typically, I would imagine that they're going to have to be playing from behind. They're going to have to throw a lot. You could have some garbage time statistics, but he's extremely inconsistent. He has no quality wide receivers. Sounds like Kelvin Benjamin may be out of the game. He's an extremely risky play. I just wouldn't take the chance with Tyrod Taylor at this point. I would sit him. Let's look at running backs. Look at LaShawn McCoy. And plays New England, who's kind of middle of the pack in terms of points allowed to running backs. He's highly used. He's their workhorse. He gets a majority of their carries. Now you add to that, he's got 52 receptions on the year. They use him a lot in the passing games. He is a must-start running back one in this one here. And take a look at running backs for New England. You got Dion Lewis. Now Rex Burkhead's going to be out of this game. He's very doubtful. Probably not going to play. In fact, he probably won't play anymore. They'll probably bring him back for the postseason. Now, if you look at Dion Lewis, he's had a high floor but a low ceiling. Now, he's been very effective, but they do spread the ball around a lot. His goal line carries went to Rex Burkhead, so that kind of lowered his ceiling and his value there. Now, with Rex out, some of those goal line carries should go to Dion Lewis, which gives him a much higher ceiling. In fact, if you look at Rex, he had 6 touchdowns in the last 4 games, so that's going to be a huge spike in Dion Lewis's value. Now he plays the Bills, who allow the most points to running backs. So Lewis is a lower-end running back one this week. That's a great play. Got to go with Dion Lewis. Let's look at wideouts in the game. Well, Kelvin Benjamin, last game, you look at Kelvin, he played 59% of the snaps in Week 15. Now, he was questionable with the game because he had a knee injury. He spent a lot of time on the sidelines in the second quarter. There's just a lot of question marks to go with him. But if you look at since he was traded from Carolina to the Bills, he just hasn't been that good. And so you look at that, so many other factors, I would sit him at this point. I would sit all other Bills wide receivers. There's nobody there that you can trust at this point. Let's take a look at the wideouts for the Patriots. Brandon Cooks hasn't had a great year per se. Now he places the Bills that allowed 11th fewest points to wide receivers, but he's still a quality wide receiver that you need to start as a wide receiver too. Now you look at the other wideouts there. You look at Danny Amendola. He's a guy that just hit or miss, not a lot of volume you can't trust. You've got Hogan. Now it looks like Hogan's going to be out to the playoffs. That's the reason why they signed Kenny Britt at this point. I would sit, really honestly, all other wideouts. Besides Brandon Cooks, I would sit all New England wideouts. So let's take a look at tight ends in this game. Let's get Gronkowski. I've got Gronkowski jersey. Here's what I say about Gronkowski. My personal humble opinion for what it's worth. To me, he's the greatest offensive tight end when he's on the field. Now, I don't think when it's all said and done, he's going to put up the numbers as a Tony Gonzalez, simply because he plays so physical. He gets beat up a lot. He misses games. But when he's on the field, I don't think there's never another tight end out there that's that productive as he is. It's a no-brainer. He's a matchup-proof tight end. You need to start him in this game.
Exactly.
Let's look at Clay in this one here. Now, Clay had a nice game last week. He plays New England, who allowed the 9th fewest points to tight ends. Now, last time he played him, Clay went for 3 catches and 20 yards. He's a very low-end play. He's definitely not top 12. I would look elsewhere if you can. Let's look at the kickers in this game. I would sit Steven Hauschka, but I would start Gostkowski in this one. I would start New England's defense, but I would sit Buffalo's defense in this game.
All right, Falcons Saints, we'll get into it. Breeze. I like Breeze. He's been a consistent quarterback. We see the last few weeks. If you look at his game log, consistency is the best word to describe it. With that running game, they always keep him moving downfield, and that offense is very hot. He also is playing the Falcons defense, which allows the 9th most points to quarterbacks. I'd have a very hard time sitting him. I don't imagine you're in a league where you have a quarterback who's going to be better than Breeze, so that's a must start. Look over on the other side there at Matt Ryan. I'm going to say you should probably sit him. He struggled lately, and the last time he played the Saints, he only got 6 fantasy points, which is really bad for a quarterback. So I'm going to say sit Matt Ryan. Now, we talk about, if you're still here at this point and your team is still rolling, that you're pretty smart and you're having a good year. That applies to Devonta Freeman, Mark Ingram, and Alvin Kamara. At this point in the season, if you're in a championship game and you have them, you've probably been starting them, and you're probably smart enough to know you should keep starting them. That's a good matchup for all 3 of those backs. I think it's going to be a good day, and I don't think that pretty much anybody has a lineup good enough to replace those guys with some other guys with how well they've been playing lately. Move on to wide receivers. I'm going to make a bold prediction here about Julio Jones and say that in most leagues, you should sit him. He's only found the end zone in 2 games this year. New Orleans gives up the 5th fewest points to wide receivers. Of course, in that offense, in that defense is going to be keying in on Julio Jones. He does not do particularly well against the Saints. Like I said, the big thing is that unless you're in a PPR league, he struggles to have value because he just doesn't get in the end zone. And then all he gets you is some yards, and he doesn't always break 100 yards, and even if he does that, what's that worth to you if he doesn't get you points for catches or touchdowns? Now, if you're in a PPR league, of course, he carries a lot more value, but that's situational. Look on the other side, Michael Thomas is definitely a start. He scored a touchdown in the last 3 games. He is their main 3rd down target, their main red zone target. You'd be dumb to keep him on your bench. As far as Willie Snead and Ted Ginn Jr., I wouldn't be playing them this week unless you just have no other choice. They've both played very bad lately, especially Ted Ginn. I would look at tight ends. Neither of these teams have tight ends that we think are worth considering putting in, so I wouldn't even think about it. Talk about kicker Matt Bryant. He's got a high floor but a low ceiling. So that means he's very consistent, 6, 7, or 8 points every game. If you're going to start him, that's basically what you're going to get. If that's what you want, great, start him. If you think maybe you're going to need more than that, then I'd roll with somebody else. Will Lutz has struggled lately. Each of the last 5 games, his points have gone down, so I would avoid playing Will Lutz. And as far as both defenses, I wouldn't start either defenses. Those are both very good offenses that don't turn the ball over a lot, that don't get their quarterback sacked a lot. I don't think it's going to be a very defensive day.
So a bold prediction there. One, I'll give you credit for going out in terms of Julio Jones saying sit him. I agree with your assessment. He has struggled at times. He's been very hit or miss. His year hasn't been that great. He had that one huge game. You take that away, and he's been very pedestrian in a lot of games. And I agree with you. If you look at his career, he actually doesn't get a lot of touchdowns. He doesn't see the red zone a lot. He had one season where he had double-digit touchdowns, although he's very low. The one thing I think is bold, and I'm not sure, is most leagues you have to start 2 to 3 wideouts, which means do you really have a wide receiver on your bench, your number 4 wideout, that's good enough to sit him? I would imagine most teams don't, but I would agree with your assessment in terms of where he's going to be at.
Yeah, no, I can understand, especially if you have a flex spot or whatever it might be. I mean, you looked at, we were in a league together, there's one league where I had definitely had wideouts where we would definitely put in other guys and he wouldn't make the lineup. And so being that, I knew there's going to be some people who shouldn't play him. Obviously, there are going to be some people you're just going to have to roll with guys even if they don't have the perfect matchup.
Like we always say, you have to put this in the context of your league and team. So versus the Jets. So take a look at the quarterbacks here. Phillip Rivers. Now, Phillip Rivers plays the Jets, who allow the 4th most points to quarterbacks. Last week, Phillip Rivers disappointed a lot of owners. I was one of those whom he disappointed. 3 interceptions. They killed me. And so what do we expect this week in a good matchup? Because last week he had a good matchup. Well, I think he's going to rebound. Now, the one thing with Phillip Rivers, he's a gunslinger. He's very Favre-esque. And so there's some risk there. But if you look at the previous 5 games before that, he's played pretty well. So I think you can feel confident starting Phillip Rivers. I expect to rebound. They're still in contention for a playoff spot. So good at Bryce Petty in this game. 1, he's not a good quarterback. 2, he plays the Chargers, allow the 5th fewest points to quarterbacks. I won't even bother considering starting Petty at this point. Now, as far as running backs go in this game, you got Melvin Gordon, plays the Jets, who allow the 16 most points to running backs. You need to start him as a running back 1. He's got 11 TDs on the year. In terms of carries, he's very solid. Austin Eckler's out for the year, so this is his team. He is the lead back, and he's used frequently in the passing game. In fact, that's going to increase with Austin Eckler being out. Last game, he had 6 catches for 91 yards, so start him as a running back 1. Take a look at the Jets running backs. You got Forte and Powell. This is that dreaded running back by committee all year. It's so confusing. To make matters worse, last week Elijah McGuire got more involved in there, so that really muddies the water. This is a sketchy situation that you should avoid at this point. You're in the championship. You can't trust any of those running backs. If you had to pick one, if you're that pressed, the guy to start would be Forte in that one. Now, as far as wideouts go, you got Keenan Allen. Now, Keenan Allen plays the Jets, who allow the 7th most points to wide receivers. Last game he left, he injured his back, but all reports are that he's going to return this week. He's going to play, and he is fine. He's a must start. In fact, if you look at between weeks 11 through 14, he was the highest scoring wide receiver, better than Hopkins or Brown, so start Keenan Allen in this one. You look at Tyrell Williams. Should you start him? Well, he's really had 2.5 good games this year, but other than that, he's had a bunch of forgettable games. He's only averaging 4.12 targets per game this year. He's a wide receiver 4. I would probably say to sit him. Let's look at the wide receivers for the Jets. You look at Robbie Anderson. He's a guy who really had turned a corner. He'd really come around. He'd played great. Then you had the Josh McCown injury. Now, last week he did get targeted 12 times, but that didn't equate into good numbers. He's had a huge drop in production with Josh out. Last 2 games he had 3 catches, 27 yards, and then he followed it up with 5 catches for 40. Now he plays the Chargers, to allow the 7th fewest points to wide receivers. This week he's going to see a lot of Casey Hayward. I would say Robbie is somebody that you should sit, or if you have to start him, he's at wide receiver 4. I would sit all other wide receivers in this game. As far as tight ends go, I would sit Antonio Gates, great tight end, Hall of Famer, but he's at the end of his career. He's not very productive. And Hunter Henry went on the IR with a kidney laceration. I would sit him. And I would sit Austin Seferian-Jenkins in this one. I would sit all kickers, and I would sit the Jets defense, but I would definitely start the Chargers defense in this game.
All right, we move on to the Broncos Redskins. I kind of think of this as a messy game. There are a lot of players that you might have to start that are in this game, but you don't want to. We're going to start off Broncos quarterbacks. No matter how desperate you are, do not start whichever Broncos quarterback is in there, right? Like it's just not going well. And we talk about last game went well though, right? And that was just a fluke.
Surprised a lot of people, and he had a good game, right?
Yeah, and don't be one of those hype guys. Don't be one of those, he has one good game and you jump on this bandwagon. That was a fluke. Flukes happen all the time, you know? Even the Browns, who are bad every year, occasionally win a game, right? It happens. So that's just a fluke. It's not going to happen again this game, especially against such a good passing defense that the Washington Redskins have. Move on to Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins has been good this year, but I wouldn't start him. Ever since Denver got Aqib Talib back, their defense has been great. In fact, I would say even phenomenal, one of the best defenses in the NFL. We'll move on to running backs. Of Denver, there's only one running back I would even consider putting in my lineup in this week. It would be C.J. Anderson. Now that really depends. And we look at the last 4 weeks, he's had increasing carries from 5, 15, 22, and 30. Last week was 30 carries for 158 yards. That's pretty good. However, we don't expect he's going to get another 30 carry game again. Those are pretty rare. So it's hard to see what we're going to expect with him, but I'd probably call him a running back 3. However, the Redskins defense give up the 13th most fantasy points to running backs. And so maybe he could be an RB2 depending. Going to the Washington running backs, I wouldn't mess around with any of them. We just don't know what's going to happen. None of them have ran effective. None of them have taken that job and are getting bulk carries. That offensive line isn't great doing any favors. That is a passing offense pretty much purely.
Their best running back, Chris Thompson, really, honestly, and he was used in both the passing game and the running game, is out for the year, and so that really was the biggest blow.
Yeah, exactly. Now we're looking at wideouts. We're going to talk about Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders first. Washington gives up the 10 fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, and that Denver quarterback situation is just ugly. So I'm very hesitant about starting Denver wide receivers. Now, Demaryius Thomas is so good, so talented. I think you got to keep him at a flex spot or a wide receiver 3. Definitely gets a lot of targets. However, Sanders, I would not. He is questionable and probably will not play. If he does play, he's a bit banged up, and you're not going to see the best of him, especially against such a good pass defense. Look on the other side, Washington. Doxson and Crowder, their wide receivers, do not play them. Denver gives up the 2nd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, and they have been far less than impressive lately. We go to tight ends. Neither Denver or Washington have any tight ends that are worth starting this week, except for you talk about maybe Jordan Reed, but that's a very bad matchup on top of the fact that
Jordan Reed's out for the year in the IR, so leaves Vernon
IR,
Davis.
yep.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yes. It's been a long day. I even wrote that in my notes, but I'm skipping over it.
It's 2 in the morning. It's our second recording, and we are tired.
Still, it's rough. I should just learn to read off of it and not look up. Move on to kickers. I would not start Washington's kicker, but McManus, Denver's kicker, McManus. He's kicked well all year, and Washington gives up the third most fantasy points to kickers, so I like McManus for sure. As far as defenses goes, I like Denver's defense. It's a good start, especially now that Aqib Talib is back, especially that Washington offense turns the ball over a lot and gives up the 9th most fantasy points to defenses. I think they're going to eat them alive that game. Washington, if you're absolutely desperate with how good their pass defense is an option. However, I might push it back. I imagine that you could probably get something better.
Panthers versus the Buccaneers. So let's take a look at Cam Newton in this game. Now, Cam plays Tampa Bay, who allowed the 17th most points to quarterbacks. Now, early in the year, he struggled throwing the ball, but his ability to run the ball kept him relevant in fantasy terms. But he's actually had some big throwing games lately, passing the ball. In fact, twice in the past 5 games, he's in one game thrown 4 touchdown passes. During that same stretch, he's had 11 touchdown passes to only 1 interception. So he's been running the ball very well. He's starting to throw the ball more effectively. He's a guy that you can start. This is a good play, starting Cam Newton in this game. So we got Jameis Winston. Now, it's kind of confusing. 2 weeks ago, he really struggled. But then last week, Monday night, he looked well against the Falcons. He had 299 passing yards and 3 TDs. Now he plays Carolina, allowed 13th fewest points to quarterbacks. If you look at the last 3 games, he's had 7 touchdown passes, only 2 interceptions. Here's why I like Winston in this game. I don't think he's a great quarterback necessarily. That offense has some issues they have to work out. But Tampa Bay's defense is poor, so often they're playing from behind. They have to throw the ball a lot to get a lot of garbage time statistics. So I think Winston is a good play in this game. As far as running backs go, we said for a while that Doug Martin needed to be shut down. He shouldn't have that job anymore. That Barber should take over. He's looked brutal. Sure enough, it happened last week. Barber came out and he ran the ball pretty hard. He ran the ball well. He's going to be this will be his job moving forward. He will be the running back one in that offense. The concern I have this week, he plays the Panthers, who allow the second fewest points to a running back. So I would say that Barber is a running back 3 play because of the matchup. Now let's take a look at the running backs for the Panthers. Yeah, Christian McCaffrey. Now he plays Tampa Bay, who allowed the 6th most points to running backs. Now if you look at the Panthers, they've actually increased his role in the running game, added to the fact that he's a great receiver. He had huge PPR value early on. He didn't run the ball great, but now you've seen him increase his carries. So I would say that McCaffrey is a running back 2 in PPR leagues. He's a running back 3 in standards. Now look at Jonathan Stewart. Now Jonathan Stewart's had 5 touchdowns the last 4 games. During that same stretch, he's had over 100 yards rushing twice. With that said, he's really struggling this year. He's got a career low of 3.5 yards per carry. I think he's a real stretch to trust him at this week. Being that you're in the Super Bowl, I would probably try to look elsewhere than Jonathan Stewart. As far as wideouts go in this game, let's look at Devin Funchess. Now he plays Tampa Bay, who allows the most points to wide receivers. Now, since he's taken over as number 1 wideout since Calvin Benjamin was traded, during those 6 games, he's had 5 games where he's been very good. Now, he did have a quiet game last game. For any Devin Funchess owners out there, I know that kind of hurt a little bit. Right?
Yeah, that wasn't pointed towards anyone, that's for sure.
Yeah, Devin Funchess last week. So
it was the perfect time for him to underperform.
Yeah, so that's unfortunate. Probably others were crushed by that, but we expect a rebound game. We think he's going to do very well in this matchup. We need to start him out there. I wouldn't start any other Carolina wideouts at this point. Let's take a look at Mike Evans for Tampa Bay. Now he plays the Panthers, allow the 6th most points to wide receivers. A lot of people had soured on him. We actually pushed him last week. For a lot of people, we said, go ahead and trust this guy. Last year, he led all wide receivers in targets. He came out with a 1,000-yard season, and he had 12 touchdowns. We went out this week. He had a good game. He had 5 catches, 79 yards, and the TDs. He actually had 2 flags, or we ended up with 3 touchdowns in a huge game, so he looked pretty good there. He's a must-start wide receiver 1. He's far too talented, 6'5". He's got a lot of skills there. And Jameis Winston typically is not afraid to force the ball his way. Start him. I would sit all other Tampa Bay wideouts. Now, as far as tight ends go in this game, you got Greg Olsen. Now, I kind of got to give you credit there because I wanted to see him prove it. He'd been back with a foot injury, played 4 games, had 2 catches, didn't look very good. I was wondering if his foot was fully healed. You told a lot of people to go ahead and start him last week. Good job, by the way. I didn't tell people to do that. He went at a huge game, 9 catches, 116 yards, and a TD, so good for you. Concern I have this week, he's got a tougher matchup. He plays Tampa Bay, and those linebackers are very talented. They allow the third fewest points to tight end. So I think you need to start Greg Olsen. He's too talented to not start, but you need to start him with lower expectations this week.
Mm-hmm.
As far as kickers go, I would start Gano, I would sit Murray, I would start Carolina's defense, but I would sit Tampa Bay's defense in this game.
All right, we'll keep this rolling talking about the Jaguars 49ers. That's an interesting matchup. First off, we'll start with the quarterbacks. We like Jimmy Garoppolo as a guy. We think he's going to help turn that franchise around. He is a good quarterback. However, don't start him this week. The Jacksonville Jaguars have the #1 pass defense in the NFL. I think they're going to shut down. We look at Bortles on the other hand. Bortles is, we're thinking, a must start this week. Plays San Francisco, obviously, as you can see, who gives it the third most points to quarterbacks. Not only that, but in the last 3 weeks, he's thrown 7 touchdown passes with 0 interceptions and averaging 300 yards a game. It's hard to ask for a quarterback to play much better than that, especially with such a good matchup. We'll move on now to the running backs. Now, there are a lot of people out there who are starting Carlos Hyde, and I'm going to have to tell you not to do that. And we all know he's underperformed, but people keep saying, oh, he's got such high volume, such high volume. First of all, there are running backs in the NFL who are getting more carries and more catches than him. His volume isn't that high, and he's not doing anything with it. He's just simply not played well. He's just ineffective against such a good defense. Can't trust the guy. We look on the other side, Fournette. He is questionable now as he returns from injury. If he plays, he will probably be limited. Now, he is Fournette, and he's played well all year, and it's hard to imagine a guy that, unless on your bench, is going to come in and safely do better. So I think if he plays, you have to start Fournette. But as you said earlier with another guy, just lower your expectations. If you have some real talent on your bench, I would probably go for it and just wait and see. Move on to wide receivers. Now, we talked about how Jacksonville has the #1 pass defense in the NFL, and Marquise Goodwin is going to have a rough day. But I think he's still a wide receiver 3, simply because Garoppolo has to throw to someone. He gets such high volume of targets and yards. Hopefully he can find the end zone. I think the ball's just got to go somewhere in that passing game. So I think he's maybe a wide receiver 3 if you're looking for one. As far as the Jacksonville receivers, though, go, they have so many different guys we've seen come in and out. And last week it was some guys who we barely even heard of, and we'll see. Hopefully, probably Lee will be back in and kind of taking over as a #1 receiver there and stuff. But you just don't know what you're going to get and where the ball is going to go. They've got no guy that really stands out, so I wouldn't start a Jacksonville receiver.
Yeah, they got some young, talented guys there. I mean, you got Lee that's done well. D.D. Westbrook had trended the right direction for 4 games. And last game, Cole comes out of there and Mixon. And a lot of those guys look potentially to be good. The problem with it is you can't trust anybody, like you said. So if you roll the dice, can you afford to take a 0 because you started Jags wide receiver in the championship game? Probably not.
If you unfortunately somehow lost a bet and you're forced to start a Jags wide receiver, Keelan Cole's the guy. He's been stepping it up like crazy lately. Look at his game logs. Every game he seems to get better. We'll move on to tight ends. Neither of these teams have tight ends that are worth starting for you, especially at this point in the season. Now we look at Jacksonville's kicker, Josh Lambo. Got to start him. He's been kicking great all year, and he plays, as you know, the 49ers, who give up the 7th most points to kickers, so you got to put him in there. I would not start the 49ers kicker this week, however. And, of course, you'd be dumb not to start Jacksonville's defense. They're going to have a fun day.
Seahawks versus the Cowboys. Look at quarterbacks. Start with Russell Wilson there. Russell Wilson's a must start. Now, I know last week you crushed a lot of owners' hopes because he had an off week. It happens. I don't care how good you are. Even the greatest player has an off week. With that said, he had an off week against a very good Rams defense, but now he plays Dallas, allowed 10th most points to quarterbacks. Now, as bad as he was last week, as much as he disappointed a lot of owners, he still managed over 15 points in most scoring systems. So even a bad week wasn't that bad for Russell Wilson. So don't let last week concern you. You need to go ahead and start him. He's going to have a great week for you out there. Take a look at Dak Prescott. Now he plays Seattle, allowed the 8th fewest points to quarterbacks, but now Cam Chancellor and Sherman are out, and it makes them vulnerable to the pass. So they're not the Seattle, it's not the Legion of Doom that they were in years past, so they're certainly vulnerable there. Now Dak has been confusing this year. The first 6 games he looked great. He went through a stretch where he struggled. He had 2 games where he rebounded, and then last game he looked bad again. So what are we to think of Dak Prescott? Well, he gets a huge boost this week. Ezekiel Elliott comes back. So why is that important? Because he's not a wide receiver. Well, here's why it's important. Play action is going to become effective, it's going to matter again with him there. Defenses won't blitz as much. They're going to game plan for shutting down Ezekiel. That's going to begin to open things up for Dak Prescott. So we think you can start him this week as a quarterback too. As far as running backs go, this is a no-brainer. Start Ezekiel Elliott. I would caution you there, though. He has been out for 6 weeks. He could be a little rusty, but he's still a guy that you need to start. And let's take a look at Mike Davis. Now, like Mike Davis, a lot of people like him. We even told some people to start depending on who you had in your matchups. He went out and he kind of stunk it up last week. So what do you begin to do? Well, he's still their lead back. The problem is Seattle's inability to run the ball has hurt them all year long. I would say he's a running back 3 play against a Dallas team that allows the 13th fewest points to running backs. Let's take a wide receivers. Look at Doug Baldwin. Last week they got blown up by the Rams. It was an insanely lopsided affair. This is really an anomaly. I think you can throw out a statistical anomaly there. Now this week Doug Baldwin plays Dallas, and Dallas allows the 4th most points to wide receivers. You need to start him as a wide receiver 2. Then you got Richardson and Lockett. Should you start either one? I would say that both those fall into what I would say wide receiver 4 or 5 category. I'd probably start neither one of those, and here's why. They could potentially be good. We've seen that Lockett will go out, or Richardson will go out, and they might have 2-3 games where they have 0 points, or they have a very unproductive game, and then all of a sudden they'll blow up for 100 yards. The problem is they're just not predictable, so I'd probably sit them. Then let's look at Dez Bryant. Now, Dez Bryant is not the Dez Bryant of old, yet he's still their best wide receiver there. So I would say that Dez Bryant is a wide receiver 3 versus Seattle, who allows the 12th most points to wide receivers. Now, as far as tight ends in this game go, you have Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham's had 2 brutal games in a row. He had one game he had 0 catches. He followed it up with 1 catch for -1 yard. But with that said, he's still got 9 touchdowns on the year. Russell Wilson loves to locate him in the red zone. So he's a good start in standard leagues. I would say he's much lower in PPR leagues or leagues that score yardage heavy. As far as Jason Witten goes, the Seattle linebackers are very good at shutting down opposing tight ends, so I would sit Jason Witten. I would sit both kickers in this game, and I would sit both defenses in this game.
All right, now we're looking at Giants versus Cardinals. We're going to start off with Eli Manning. Eli Manning had a good week last week. However, 1 week does not make a quarterback, and that was, as I said a couple times today, that's a fluke. Things like that happen. Bad players play good. And you mentioned a minute ago, good players have bad weeks. It just happens. Crazy things happen. Do not trust him this week. We just don't know. I'm going to have to assume that he's going to be a bad quarterback or a bad fantasy quarterback, as he's been all year. Of course, sit Cardinals QB, as I wrote here. We started doing the research, and even before we went and did the research, as we were talking about, they were waffling on who they were going to start. Does it matter? Either quarterback on that roster that gets in there is not a good quarterback, not going to play well. So we'll move on and look at running backs. I'm talking about Kerwin Williams for the Cardinals. He's a fairly solid fill-in if you're looking for a running back, maybe a running back 3 or a flex spot. He is the main running back for Arizona, and he's going against the Giants to give up the 31st most points to RBs, or they're the 31st best run defense, I should say. So that's a great matchup that we like a lot. We look on the other side for the Giants is Wayne Gallman. Now, I would consider him an RB4 in a standard league, and a PPR league he's more involved, so maybe he's an RB3, maybe he fits your flex spot. Who knows? As we always say, it depends on your team and the context. However, he does face Arizona, that gives up the 8th fewest fantasy points to running backs. We'll move on to wide receivers now and talk about Larry Fitzgerald. I would call Larry Fitzgerald a wide receiver 3 in a PPR that you should start. And he doesn't have a great quarterback, but the Giants do give up the 12th most points to wide receivers. He is the #1 wide receiver. And in a PPR, man, Fitzgerald gets a lot of catches. He gets a lot of targets. We look in the Sterling Shepard for the Giants. We really like Sterling Shepard for next year. He's going to be great. I also like him for this game. This is a start for sure, wide receiver 3, possibly wide receiver 2. In the last 2 games, he's gotten 16 receptions over 200 yards. As he's come back from injury. So he's playing great. He's the #1 wide receiver. We know the ball's going to come his way a lot. We just find out, whether or not he's going to get in the end zone. Another weapon that the Giants have that we like, if you're looking for a tight end, and we've talked about it today, that the tight end position is kind of shallow and there isn't much talent there, is Evan Ingram. He's a very talented guy who's played well, especially in the last 3 games. If you're looking for a tight end, he's a guy that you should be happy to fill in with.
You look at Evan Ingram. He's a guy that coming out of camp, they talked so highly, first round pick. They talked about how quick, great hands, athletic. He's a guy that's got the talent. He falls in that category. He's got the skill level of a Gronkowski and a Travis Kelce. Now, there's a lot that can happen. I think going into next year, I believe that Evan Ingram's going to be a top 5 in the tight end rankings. He's got that sort of talent. He's the guy that's going to move into that sort of conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Now we'll move on to kickers. Keep this short and simple. Sit Aldrich Rosas, the Giants kicker, and start Phil Dawson, the Arizona Cardinals kicker. He's averaging 13 points a game in the last 4 weeks, and the New York Giants give up the 11th most points to kickers. That's a great match. Gotta love it. I would sit both of these defenses, especially the absolutely atrocious Giants defense that has only managed to get 2 fantasy points in the last 3 weeks. Absolutely horrible. Don't even consider starting either of these teams.
Look at the Steelers versus the Texans. We'll look at Ben Roethlisberger. Now he plays Houston, who give up the second most points to quarterbacks. Now Antonio Brown's going to be out with a calf injury. You need to start him anyway. He's got a great matchup, and he still has a great wide receiver. Back to his second favorite wide receiver still there, and that's Le'Veon Bell. He'll have Juju Smith-Schuster, Latavius Bryant, so you need to go ahead and start him. He's been playing very well. Let's take a look at Yates, quarterback for the Texans. You need to sit him one. He's a bad quarterback, and he plays a very good defense, so don't even think about it. Now let's take a look at running backs. Do I even need to say this? Le'Veon Bell is what we call matchup proof. You need to start him every game. Got to start him. Lamar Miller in this one. Well, Lamar Miller, with Yates at quarterback, his value continues to plummet at this point. Defenses can focus on shutting him down. So he's what we'd say, because of his volume, maybe a running back 3, and even that's a little bit sketchy at that point. So I would try to stay away from starting Lamar Miller. Let's look at wideouts in this game. Look at Hopkins. Now Hopkins, he's really thrived when he had Watkins at quarterback there, but even with Savage at quarterback at Yates, besides Antonio Brown, he's, I think, the most matchup-proof wide receiver out there. He's very talented. He continues to put up great numbers. Even against the Jaguars, he had 80 yards and a TD. This is a guy that you must start. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. You need to start Hopkins. He's extremely talented. Let's look at wide receivers. I won't start any other wide receivers for Houston at this point. Let's look at the wide receivers for Pittsburgh. So you look at Juju Smith-Schuster and you look at Martavius Bryant. They play Houston, allow the 5th most points to wide receivers. So I'd start Juju Smith-Schuster as a wide receiver 2 and Martavius Bryant as a wide receiver 3 in this matchup. As far as tight ends go, you got Jesse James. I would start him as a low-end tight end 2 in a good matchup. I would sit Anderson. As far as kickers go, I would start Boswell, and I would sit Houston's kicker. I would sit the Texans defense, but I would start Pittsburgh's defense in this one.
I know we talk about the last match I'm going to talk about today is the Raiders and the Eagles. Just get started. It's probably one of the simplest ones we went through. Nick Foles, he's a start. You might have better options in this league, and that's where you might have to come to us and ask. You might just have to make some tough decisions if you have a good quarterback, say you have Drew Brees. But Nick Foles, he threw 4 touchdowns last game. Of course, we can't expect that, but 2 touchdowns is reasonable against Oakland's defense that gives up the 12th most points to quarterbacks. So if you have to start him, don't be too nervous. I think he's going to be just fine. And the other side, as I just mentioned, Oakland Raiders and Derek Carr. Derek Carr, not a very good start this week, especially when we consider that Amari Cooper might not play. He is questionable, and if Amari Cooper doesn't play, do not start Derek Carr. And if Amari Cooper does play, maybe, but you have to be pretty desperate. We don't like him. He hasn't played very well lately. So we'll move on right away to running backs. We'll talk about Jay Ajayi. If I'm saying that right, I probably say it 6 different times a day, or 6 different ways, and never probably quite say it right. But his role has increased. However, he has yet to find the end zone. I'm going to call him an RB2 or a flex spot. I believe this is the week he finds the end zone. He's played well. He's been effective. It's not his performance. That's the problem. This is the week he's going to punch it in. It's going to be great. I believe you agree with me on that one.
Yeah, I think he's done really well. His yards per carry, they've increased his role as he's become more familiar with that offense. I like him going forward to next year, and I think this is the weekend he probably does see the pay dirt.
Yep. The other guy is Lynch. We're going to say sit Lynch. They're playing against Philadelphia, who allows the 2nd fewest points to running backs. On top of that, Lynch has just been bad this year. There's no other way to put it. We'll come back to wideouts now, and Amari Cooper again. Again, he is questionable. If he plays, he's a wide receiver 4, maybe a wide receiver 3. Nothing more than that. Even if he plays, he's a bit banged up, which is obvious. I'll move on to Michael Crabtree. He's a must start. He got over 10 targets in 5 of the last 7 games and a touchdown. And he's kind of a touchdown machine. It's what he does well. In fact, last year there's kind of complaints all he does is score touchdowns. Like in fantasy, we don't care, especially if he's the only wide out there. Especially if Amari Cooper doesn't play, he's got to think that he's going to get a lot of targets, a lot of yards, especially in the red zone. Definitely start Crabtree. Nelson Aguilar, if you're looking for another guy, he's trending up and should be a good wide receiver 3. I could see him playing up to a 2, but I'm more expecting a wide receiver 3. Gets lots of targets in the red zone, and I think Nick Foles really seems to like him. They seem to be working well together. Move on to tight ends. The Raiders don't have a tight end that I would consider starting, but of course Zach Ertz for the Eagles, with 8 touchdowns this season, is a guy I couldn't imagine leaving out of your lineup. I don't know. I couldn't imagine having a better tight end than him with him sitting on the bench. Look at kickers. You've got to start Elliott for the Eagles and the Tavecchio or Tavicchio kicker for the Raiders. Don't play him. He's been bad all year, and it's a bad matchup. Of course, start Philly's defense. They've been great all year. They've been consistent, and they're playing a bad offense. And, of course, sit Oakland's defense, which has been brutal for the last couple of years now. So, that's it for our games, our start and our sit. Of course, as always, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask us, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability. Rob, what do you want to say before we close out?
Yeah, that was going to be it. We'd love to answer any question you may have. Put them in the bottom of the video. Try to get us to us in a timely manner. Sunday mornings, I work, so you need to get those questions in before that. Look for the next video. We're going to make some improvements, lighting, video quality, things like that. Thank you once again for joining us. Subscribe, share it, continue. Next year, we're looking forward to bringing you better products, better information, whatnot. So thank you for joining us here. God bless from the Fantasy Ball Prophets.